Okay, good morning everyone. I think we'll get started now. We're just past time, so let's move on so that we can get the schedule running in the way it should. So welcome to day 3 of the event. This is our facilitation day. My name is Bill Ayres. I'm the strategic lead for research data management from the University of Manchester Library. Here to chair the session this morning. We've got quite a big panel here, so I'm just going to give you a very quick overview of what this session's about, but then I think I'll let people introduce themselves and we'll crack on with the topics. I've not been made aware of any housekeeping issues, so any housekeeping that you were told on the previous days of the event still stands, but if a fire alarm goes off, then I think we probably do need to leave the room. So yeah, this panel's going to focus on various things, but this is around DRI systems components, and we'll focus on the bringing together of estates, hardware, software, networks, storage, lab equipment, security systems, and the people and skills that we need towards that support them to take them forward with a research setting. Some of the key principles that underpin design, the timescales around this, which we all know is a big factor. Something I think is very interesting: buy versus build versus co-create, and then the decisions that are short-term versus those that play out in the longer term, and some key concerns around those. So I'd like to just start with letting our panel go from this side down to just say hi and introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Simon Burbridge. A lot of you know me. I've been around in the HPC scene for a couple of decades or so. So I worked at originally at ULCC, which was one of the old national centres in the old days. And I've worked at the University of Bristol and Imperial College London. I've also worked for a seismic processing company in industry and for a vendor. So I think I have quite a lot of experience, and I'd really love to share that with you.
So I'm Peter Heywood. I'm a research software engineer at the University of Sheffield. I've only been at the University of Sheffield, and my background's in GPUs. I'm also involved in BEAD as part of the Spark Group and the Documentation Task Force.
My name is Peter Hill. I'm an EPSRC RSE fellow. I work in software sustainability within the plasma science community at the University of York. So I kind of trying to improve as much of the plasma science software ecosystem as I can. I'm not sure if we're still doing first computers. Mine was the Amiga 500 Plus with an extra 1 megabyte of RAM.
Wonderful.
Hi, I'm Sam Bland, and I'm a research software engineer, or embedded research software engineer in the Stockholm Environment Institute. I'm also the NHCAR RC theme lead. I'm kind of on this panel, I guess, more of as a user, and also how some of these things, how you work with some of these kind of things when your team is only a size of 2, and what you can actually achieve at that level.
Hi, I'm Emma Barnes. I'm Head of Research and Faculty IT at the University of York. So we actually manage a lot of the hardware. We also have RSEs in our team, but we also have done a lot of work trying to consolidate a lot of hardware, research IT compute from departments, and trying to make a more streamlined, easy to maintain and easy to manage solution for the university going forwards.
Hi, I'm Simon Hood. I'm Head of Research Platforms at Manchester. So my team develops and supports the specialist IT platforms used by our researchers. Quick potted history. In a previous life, I spent 2 years at Logica writing safety critical avionics software as a software engineer there. But after 2 years, I scuttled back to academia, did a PhD, then spent 6 years at Liverpool as a postdoc. And for my sins, playing with the Solaris workstations rather than actually doing the research I was paid for, I ended up in effectively research IT, and I've been here for 24 years.
Thanks very much, everyone. So yeah, I'm not going to, like I say, not say too much myself because I'm going to be on a bunch of other panels today, and you'll get to hear plenty from me. So to get things started, there's quite a general question here, which I know that one of the panelists has already, this was to some amusement for this person, but I want to ask the panel, and I'm thinking that we'll have probably 40 minutes or so of kind of panel conversation. If you do have particular burning questions, please do put your hands up and we can facilitate those. Then we'll have a bit of time at the end for free conversation and questions. To start things off, so what do you feel were the core guiding principles that led to the setup that you currently have? So the question there around guiding principles and whether they existed, I suppose. I don't know who wants to. Simon, start up.
Okay, well That was quite easy when I read the questions from you about half an hour ago, Bill. What are the core guiding principles? That's easy. Get out and talk to your customers. One of the things that people in my team are not encouraged to do, forced to do because I make them, is get out and talk to the researchers every day, at least every week. If you aren't speaking to them every week, you don't know what they're doing, you don't know what their problems are, you don't know how we can help them. Doing that has led directly to 4 of our services, and I've just got them listed here. About 12 years ago, we set up a Linux-based interactive compute service. It was designed to be interactive from the ground up, no batch system of any kind. It's a hell of a bodge, but it's still running 12 years later and very popular. It led to the storage service, our VM service, and most recently to our edge compute service, where we develop and support custom bits of kit for individual research groups. So it's one principle only: get out there and talk to your customers.
Yeah, and I guess a response to that maybe from me would be, what is the best way to do that across? And we know we work with many researchers, thousands of researchers, so what is the way that we can actually do that effectively, Simon, or anyone?
Well, in spite of the fact that, as you say, there's thousands of them, the best way, by far the best way, is get out there and drink coffee with them. Yeah. Video calls are terrible, phone calls are worse, and email is a disaster. Get out there physically and speak to people. It's the only way.
Yes,
simple as that.
Would anyone else on the panel like to respond to that particular theme?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, yeah.
Very much agree with that. Communication is really important, and many of our scientists aren't great communicators in the general sense. They're very good in their domain, and they're very good at communicating with their colleagues, but when it comes to something weird and wacky like computing, they don't really know. So you have to listen really hard and understand what they need rather than what they say they want.
Yeah, and Emma?
Yeah, so I very much agree with that. I think another component which I've tried to push at the university is making whatever we create, make it accessible. And sometimes I'm literally taking an academics cluster or their desktop or something like that. So obviously communication is really important there because you're taking something that they're doing their research on. But it's not just taking that. I want to make something better and actually show that I'm giving them more. So, many years ago when we consolidated a lot of these clusters together, the aim was to provide a better service. And through that was, yes, you still have access to your bit, but now you can use these bits as well, and you can use the same password because you don't have NIS running in the background, which we've got rid of. So it's not just the communication, it's like, let's make something better out of all of this. And I think then you start to build trust and other people want to be part of what you're trying to do.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that there's a factor there which is around partnership with academic colleagues to be able to bring these things through, and that is really significant throughout the whole strand of what we're talking about today for facilitation. So moving on to the next kind of topic query for the panel here, and this is probably 2 parts, and it's around experience and persuasion. To what extent has the experience of research technology professionals influenced the capability beyond the fulfilment of just a shopping list? And what did the powers of persuasion look like? So I guess this is like I say, it's a balance between, what do we design that isn't just something we can buy off the shelf, how we get there, and also who do we have to persuade and how we do that? How do we do that to persuade people that this is the investment that our institution or our setting needs?
Yeah, again, it's to do with your partnership and collaboration with your users. I use that word because I think it's the best one. You collaborate with them, they use your systems. They're not customers, they don't pay directly, so a very formal relationship isn't necessarily the best one. As part of the roles of your centre, you're looking at new technology and new features all the time, and you need to keep this kind of horizon scanning going. So if you see something coming up that you think might be interesting, like, oh, the next generation service has twice as many memory channels, so you can have twice as much memory at reasonable cost, is that something that would be really good for your particular branch of science? Because in certain cases that can make it kind of a game changer. It means, oh, I can do problems twice the size or whatever. But your users won't know about that necessarily. So be out there giving them suggestions, but also as part of that process, you get the feedback from them saying, yeah, I'm not interested in memory, but actually I think I can vectorize better or something else. You make a little note of that, and then when a new vector instruction comes along or a new type of CPU, you can say, oh, try that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Does anyone else want to respond to that particular aspect of the query?
I think
yeah, of course.
one thing that we face a lot is kind of dealing with legacy projects.
Yeah.
And it's kind of understanding when to persuade them to go beyond their comfort zone of an old language that they've learned, and they quite often have been kind of working on these little tools that they've been working on for like 30 years. And it's kind of having that discussion with them about what are the limitations of the way that you're working. Trying to get some feedback from them on how engaged they are in changing that way of working, and trying to find what the medium is between that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it leans into the persuasion aspect, and one of the things that I think is significant from my own experience is that we have to persuade not just our colleagues and the people who are working in the area that we're directly involved with, but also there's always going to be the point where it goes up the tree if you're going to be securing funding from whatever source. I wonder whether anyone has any particular. Yeah, Emma. Yeah,
so one thing we did from the outset when we first got our big cluster is try to sort of take a lot of, we tagged the projects, but also it meant that we had a PI of a group who we can contact all the time and talk to. But we have Pure where people submit their papers and things like that, but we had a tag for Viking, for example, and we would put out surveys. So we actually have a record. It's not perfect, but we have some sort of record of publications, outputs, data sets, things like that. We also have a record of some of the grant applications where people have mentioned Viking and mentioned, added them to their grant to boost it up, to say, look, we have the facility to do our research at the university and it's free. And through that, I've been able to collate and provide evidence that we should continue to invest in this because it's an investment, it's free at the point of use, but actually the amount of grant funding and papers and outputs we've received from doing that, it's well worth it. Never mind the teaching and all the other side of things as well. So having some sort of number, it's not perfect, but it's a number where you can feed that up the chain is compelling for them.
Yeah, very interesting. Simon, were you going to say something?
Yeah, along the sort of powers of persuasion idea, I mean, it made me think of how we've built a lot of the services we've got here at Manchester. Most of them have been built on a business case to get seed funding. From there on, we can get PIs to contribute money, build the service up. So how do you get the seed funding? Well, we have to go to the Research IT Strategy and Change Management Board, which is a bit of a mouthful. But anyway, so this I learned from my former boss, the person who was Rob Haynes before he was Rob Haynes. Never, ever present a business case cold. You've got no chance. So get to know the people on that board, all the key players, get to know them personally. Brings me back to the coffee. Make sure you've had coffee with all the key players. Then when you've sketched out your business case, go and speak to them individually in advance. Socialise that business case. Make sure that they already agree with it and are ready to say yes before you get to the board. Then when you get to the board, you can sit back and you know your job's done before you even open your mouth. Works every time.
Definitely want to keep in the back pocket there. So just one thing to return maybe to the point that Emma made. So we have Pure as our Crescent Manchester team, and one of the things that has been implemented really recently is the equipment and facilities module, which is around, I think it touches very closely on the topic that you were talking about, which is this ability to give credit to services and to facilities and to things like our core facilities in the university where data is being generated, and also the HPC and other aspects, because that ability to have them in papers and properly kind of referenced and citations that we'll pick up, and also in some cases we're looking at things like the technician's commitment where we can bring technical staff into the fray for having actual credit given to them. That is something that I think is it has been missing for a long time and is really, really essential. So good to know that that's happening with you guys. So yeah, I mean, just in terms of this topic, I'm thinking of time, but yeah, we're okay. The other side of this was the the first part, which was around, I guess, the difference between, so what do we bring to this as professionals with our experience and the skills and the knowledge that we built versus the fulfilment of that shopping list. So I guess where do we intersect with the technology in a way that actually we are shaping that rather than just buying something. I don't know whether anyone wants to particularly respond to that aspect.
I wonder if we do shape the technology.
Yeah.
Certainly in software we have an impact because we can write some of it, and a lot of software these days is developed in the community and at least starts out as an open source software before it gets commercialised and too expensive to use. In terms of hardware, I think really there is some recognition by the vendors that research computing is important. But the one that's really had an impact recently is AI and machine learning. And I think that's the only good example I can see in the past kind of couple of decades where hardware manufacturers have responded to users in a very direct way and created all of the amazing stuff we now have being developed in machine learning.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're going to lean into AI as a topic, possibly in the next panel actually. So we'll certainly be returning to that. Peter, did you have a?
Yes, so I think at Sheffield we've done a lot of benchmarking work within the RSC group, and that's been fed back into our central IT and potentially influenced the hardware that's been purchased sort of from that angle.
Yeah.
So rather than just guessing at what users want, actually benchmarking users' code and providing evidence. And through some of the vendors, we've been able to try that on hardware we've not purchased yet to influence our decisions, which has been very helpful.
Good to hear.
I think in terms of software, it's different because we've not got like a shopping list, but there's lots of things that I would love to do to write to make things better. But as an RSC, you can like see more of the software ecosystem and see where like gaps are and what would be useful for somebody to write, and you can like work towards like developing that capability. But then there are some things that are sort of fixed. There's things like file types that are, there's not much you can do about it. There's too much software that are using some particular file types. Even if they're not very good file types, you kind of can't unilaterally get rid of them, even though you would. That's on my shopping list, destroy that file type. But there are things that you can do in terms of like developing abilities to convert that file type to something more sensible and then build on top of that more sensible file format. So that's sort of quite a different perspective from instead of thinking in terms of like hardware.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is me coming at things from the kind of the library research data management angle rather than being an RSC or directly in that world. And I wonder, is there any kind of comment from the panel around the aspect of where the interface is between software and the kit that you're running things on and the hardware? And is that something that you get enough of an input and influence in the setting that you're working in?
Yeah, I mean,
So-
one of the areas we do seem to have a certain amount of influence, certainly not with the hardware vendors, but with the major cloud providers. We've got a really good working relationship with AWS, and I know York has and some of the other universities have. We worked very closely with them on the development of our TRE some years ago, and more recently our discussions with them are clearly influencing their development of research data storage, management, archive areas. We're hoping to speak to them next week about that. I think York spoke to them last week. So that's an area where we can have a major influence on a massive provider to higher education research in this country. Amazon, they're listening. Not so sure about some of the other cloud providers so much. Amazon definitely are.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, this to me feels as though it's an area where you've just said obviously Manchester and York are both already in that mix, and the N8 itself obviously has the ability to bring the kind of collective nature of the organisation to bear too. And like you say, if we're doing that, then that gives us more of a kind of a seat at the table for these kind of conversations and to influence the way the technology goes. Okay, so the next topic that the theme wants us to cover is, to me, around kind of the history of what we do and where we are now. And it's talking about what elements of the configuration for your service did you have to think about a long time ago, and which of them are relatively recently. And it's also saying how much of what you are able to do is determined by decisions made many years ago. So I suppose this is the, as we know in HE, the legacy of the long tail of people who worked here for a long time. So yeah, it's about, I suppose, the history of where we've got to, and then how we move on from there. Emma.
Yeah, so, I mean, I joined York, well, it's nearly 10 years ago now, that flies by. So when I arrived at York, I'm based in IT services. There was definitely a different relationship between the departments and IT services, and that meant there was a lot of shadow IT. I think this is probably similar to many places, mainly because the central IT were not providing what academics needed. I get it, right? I understand. So, you know, having to so that it's been a long road, and we're still finding things, we're still trying to change things, but trying to not only change that perception of IT services, you know, we're not all bad, we're actually wanting to change, or wanting to talk to academics, or wanting to understand what do you actually need, so let's do that, make it better. And so there's kind of that person piece, the trust piece, and that takes a long time. And then there's the hardware piece of, you know, best practice, and saying you can't have 50 websites on one web server which is not patched, and, you know, and moving away from NAS drives and cupboards and all this sort of stuff, and bringing that, at least centralising that, and then trying to build on and create something better. So that's the bit that kind of was already there and required a lot of work to fix and change. Then there's the other piece of just technology moving so quick. You know, our first Viking cluster, we didn't have enough GPUs, and we asked lots of people, do you want GPUs, do you want GPUs? They're like, nah, it'll be fine, nah, we don't want that. And, you know, 2 years later, it's like, we need more GPUs. So there's things that are going to change, the landscape's going to change, technology's going to change, and when you have these kind of fixed points of money investment, you are potentially going to be behind. So sometimes it is quite hard to kind of predict what you need. Things like cloud and getting little bits of capital can help plug that gap temporarily. But it's, at some point you're playing catch up, and data is another thing, research data management, where we're always playing catch up with that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at Simon Hood here, because I'm thinking about we are at the moment at Manchester just moving into the second iteration of our research lifecycle programme, which is an investment over 5 years to remove barriers to research in a very kind of broad and general way. But we'll be asked to look in the crystal ball to decide about what those projects need to be for the next 5 years in some cases. And I know, Simon, in your case, obviously, you've got to really lean into that kind of thinking about where the technology needs to take us. I don't know whether you want to...
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess the sort of overriding general rule of thumb, if you like, about how long ago do you need to make a decision to bearing in mind what you need to know now, depends how far you are up the stack. I mean, I can log in now to our HPC cluster and change the batch system configuration on the fly. But if you're thinking about our resilient storage, or even worse, the campus network, you've got to think several years in advance. I mean, the biggest thing that's having the biggest impact on the research community at the University of Manchester at the moment, and not in a good way, is the campus network. I was talking to somebody about half an hour ago about the fact that we need to share things that went wrong as much as success stories. So here's something that went wrong. About 5 years ago, the University of Manchester decided it really needed to replace those 15-year-old Cisco switches that were out on campus that we couldn't patch anymore. So we started a project to transform the network, and bizarrely the people in charge decided that there was no infrastructure out on campus. It was just end-user devices, people using laptops. They didn't even need wired connections, and they could all use 802.1x. As you can imagine, this has caused so much pain. We're running out of opiates in Manchester. It's just insane. We've actually, some of the buildings that were transformed actually had to be untransformed because the amount of screaming from senior professors reached that level of deafening. That's something that needs to be thought of at least 5 years ahead. Thankfully, we now have a network architect in who understands we're a university and not a bank. And sadly, it's going to take another 5 years to fix the problems. So it depends how far up the stack you are. If it's batch system, can change that in half an hour. Infrastructure like storage or the network in particular, you've got to think of maybe a decade in advance.
I don't know if anyone else on the panel wants to respond to that particular topic around.
I think that, particularly in software and in that kind of theme of sharing mistakes, that really documenting those decisions and why you made them, because sometimes you can look back and think, I'm sure I made that for a reason, it seems stupid now, and then you change it back, and then you look, and then so many months down the line you think, oh, that's why I did that. and you can kind of end up ping-ponging, even on your own project where it's only you do forget why you've done that, and that kind of documentation of mistakes and why I've made them, and also the sharing of that in community, so we don't all make those same mistakes.
We're in a safe space, so does anyone else want to share anything?
I think this is terribly important. It's very easy to become a bit insular, especially post-COVID, when we might not see each other in formal context so often, but also the kind of management style that's popular in the UK now, which we see reflected in companies and government and social situations. It's very much a blame culture, and it's very much not about doing things well, it's about hiding things you did badly. And really that's not a good way to go, and we're all not heavily funded, so if we make a mistake we have to pay for it, but if we make repeated mistakes we pay for them multiple times. So we really need to be very open and very collegiate about the way we work with technology, especially with new things which don't always work perfectly. Share the experience, enable your colleagues across the community to learn from that, so we can all move on much better and much faster than we would be able to otherwise.
Yeah, and again I think that's something that is reflected in the importance of organisations like the N8 to give people this kind of space in the room to talk about these things. I'm just thinking the history of this is just an observation from me, but the history of research IT at Manchester. Simon will recall there was a director of IT, and not our current one, who we are very fond of, but a couple of instances ago, who didn't know what research IT was when he had been here for 9 or 10 months at that time. So this is, I think, reflects the challenge that we face sometimes, that this work isn't taking place in the dark, but it's something that unless people actually have a knowledge of what we do, knowledge of the sector, knowledge of HE, then it can be completely opaque for the people that that are really significant in terms of making the decisions on this stuff. So yeah, we have to be visible, don't we?
Yeah, well, it was that former director that was largely responsible for the network we are now suffering. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, we'll say no more about that. Right, so yeah, just moving on with the topic and thinking of time. So the question we'll be asked to consider for the panel is around solutions and people. I think it's particularly interesting. To what extent are requirements fulfilled by the purchasing of solutions, and where has it been necessary to invest in people and people's skills and technology to deliver that capability? So this is to my mind, the eternal tension between buying stuff and then having people who can actually run and provide a sustainable service that stuff then is part of. So yeah, to anyone on the panel. Emma.
Yeah, so I keep going on about my first cluster. So when we decided to do a procurement for Viking, I think we only had 1.5 FTE dedicated to HPC at the time, and half of that FTE was me also managing people. So we didn't have much. We also had bits of people, but it wasn't dedicated time. So one of the decisions we made at the time was to get a provider, Ayres, to actually manage the hardware of our cluster. But other things as well, we couldn't put Viking on campus. I had to go into a data centre in Leeds, so it wasn't even on-prem because we didn't have enough power. It's still the case. And that actually meant we were freed up to actually focus more on the user side, start building up the team. I was able to focus on building the RSE component at York as well. And we didn't have to go and swap disks and stuff like that. I mean, don't get us wrong, we still have hardware to manage. I think people seem to think that, we just, shove that somewhere else. We've got sort of Linux interactive servers. We've got other bits of kit in our data centres, some FPGA type stuff. But it just meant that this huge behemoth was not something we had to constantly worry about all the time. And at the time, we also changed from SGE to Slurm, so there was a lot of learning that we had to do, and moved to Easy Build as well. And that's been good because we've been able to slowly build up the team, and one of my team members is now an easy build maintainer, having gone from no knowledge at all to actually now, adding to the community. And we've been able to not worry too much about that, and also take a few risks. We've just moved our second iteration to Sweden. I don't know if we would have done that if we had to completely manage it ourselves. I think it would have been very difficult. I don't know. So it's been good in that regard for us to kind of realise we can't necessarily do everything, and where do we want to focus our attention, and where do we want to, and for me it's people, users, that side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think
Oh, yeah, Peter.
so. From the software side, it's less about like purchasing software, because for research software, there's much less off the shelf. At least in my domain, there are some things, but actually that tends to be areas where we like co-create things with industry, and then get discounts on it or whatever. But then the decision is more about, do you try and use some existing tool that's out there already and try and adapt it to your needs, or build something new, and then you have a lot more knowledge about the code and the physics or whatever that goes into it from the ground up, but that takes a lot of investment of time and resources to build something completely from scratch. But then you might have to still put in a lot of time and investment in understanding what the options are out there that already exist, and whether you need to adapt them yourself, and you still need to put in some effort there. It's very rare that you find something that does exactly what you want out there in terms of software. So it's similar sort of considerations in like how much investment do we put in-house in terms of like development.
Yeah, Simon, I'll come to you in a second. Just to respond to that Peter, I think one of the things that to me is a kind of a universal truth across all the services that we're involved in our many different areas is that if you are building something, then that becomes something you have to maintain, and potentially you have to have a sustainable way of doing that, and that's always a challenge to get, we know this, to get people on the baseline of costs, as permanent members of staff, to do this is always a challenge. There's a tendency that universities do like to spend money on hardware and things that you can see in that regard, and necessarily, and I understand the reasons why, but they're necessarily not as keen to get people onto the baseline.
So just one more point on that is that actually it's also really difficult to get money for maintaining software.
Yeah.
Like adding new features to software, that's, I wouldn't say easy, but there's routes for that. Whereas if you just we've got a thing and we want to keep it working, that's much, I think, at least from my side, it seems much harder to get money for that.
Yeah.
And perhaps it's easier for a hardware service where it's, but you can maybe get permanent staff. Maybe it's professional services. I mean,
not at the moment.
Well, at least with software, we've got the RSE community now.
Yeah.
And I think that's made a huge change over the past few years. And the ability now to go to your research councils and funders and say, can I buy an RSE for 6 months to work on my code? I think that's a really good improvement. Yeah. So let's try and do that more.
Yeah.
Across the board. Let's invest in the system side of things as well, and the kind of the operational niceties. I think one of the areas we could work on is on workload schedulers, to make those more flexible and to learn more across the community. Yeah. But again, that needs more investment in people in the centre running the machines, and that's seen as almost like a cost centre, whereas it's not. Put some effort into that. And I would say, look at the number of people your average HPC cluster supports, the number of researchers. It's way more than any of the other research equipment you've got in the university. So proportionately, we're really low on staff, and it would be really good to have a bit more investment in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Simon, did you want to comment on this?
Yeah, something I wanted to mention was a model we use at Manchester. In terms of the HPC platforms we've got two. We pretty much look after them from hardware and network switches all the way up to software installed, in conjunction with ALSYS and OCF, I should add. But the other platforms we've got, for example, research VMs, research data storage, the model we use is in research IT that we piggyback off of the enterprise solutions that the wider IT services has bought. What that allows us to do is, rather than focus on keeping a rock-solid, stable enterprise solution going, which is necessary for things like storage and VMs, we can concentrate on, and I hate to use this phrase, so I apologise in advance, we can concentrate on adding value on top. It's a good business case phrase. We can add flexibility, responsiveness. We can, if you like, add something on top which takes that rigid enterprise solution and makes it bendy and wiggly shaped and hence suitable for the research community. I mean, a really simple example, we've got a rock solid research data storage platform at the university. It's called Isilon, came from EMC, now Dell. It's really, really good at offering 1,000 connections to 1,000 clients at the same time. But that's about all it does. It does not much else at all. So we've added services on top of that, using the VM platform as it happens, simple web-based interfaces to it, for example. So piggybacking is a good way to go for some services. And let's face it, you want your storage to be absolutely bulletproof, because if it isn't, you may as well resign tomorrow.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So I don't know if there's any more comments on that particular topic from the panel.
I just want to pick up something that Simon just said about, basically, my guiding principle is that the tools exist to serve us, and we should bend them to our wills and not flex to them. And so that's why I like software. I can adapt it and make it work for me the way that I want to. That's why I use Emacs.
Yeah, thanks.
It's to Emacs.
That possibly actually leads nicely into the next topic that I wanted the panel to consider, which was, and it returns actually to something that we were talking about a little bit earlier in terms of working with Amazon. But so, how much has co-creation of capability with suppliers and researchers been in what has been established, and in what direction do you see things moving in the future? So is that towards packaged solutions or to more bespoke co-created capabilities? It's that question of, I guess, of how much of a voice do we have in this process?
I think part of that, in my field, part of that is sort of the related to the technology readiness level of the thing. So the co-creation of software is for stuff that is usable by industry now, that does something that industry have some process, and we've got the tools that can model that accurately enough that industry can use it, and that's where the co-creation of software packages happens. And the stuff that is more speculative, or the industry aren't actively don't have an active process that they're developing, that's where we develop bespoke research software. So I don't think there's a trend as such. Sure. It's just as things mature, then there's like a conveyor belt towards that.
Yeah, okay. I'm maybe just going to throw one in from my experience working within the research services area of the library, and thinking about co-creation with suppliers. So we have a Figshare research data management repository, and that's something where I do feel as though, having worked with lots of different suppliers over many years in different areas, it is great to meet a supplier that actually is open and flexible in what they give to you and provide in the way that Figshare are, and I can say this I think on record. They are very responsive to what we need in terms of the repository. They are very open to changes and to improvements that we could recommend, and that's done through, it's never a democracy, but it is done through a process of a little bit like what we do, and then I guess garnering support across the Figshare user group in the UK and Ireland who can have skin in the game. So we get features added, and we can have changes made to that in a kind of a fairly direct and pretty responsive way, which I think is unusual in my experience compared to the rigid platform that you often get from other suppliers. So yeah, I don't know whether anyone wants to maybe consider this topic, and before we move on to the final couple.
I think
something
on that kind of the idea of piggybacking on other services, and that's something that we do actually quite a lot in software, particularly on things like the React framework, which is came out of the back of Facebook.
Yeah.
And we often actually have a lot more confidence where there's some industry backing, because we know they're going to continuously use it. It's going to be used for beyond our project at least. Where there's something that's potentially academic backed or something we've built in-house, we can't rely on there being constant updates for something like that.
Yeah, good, interesting point. Okay, so the final couple of topics that I wanted to think about before we move some questions for the floor. And this is the eternal question of change. So in terms of your service or capability, how do you manage change and achieve that balance of stability, capability, security and usability? So the kind of the core factors that come into providing a service that's going to work and keep working, balanced with the kind of the spectre of change that hangs over everything that we do.
It's hard.
Yeah.
But it's not impossible.
Yeah.
So I think I've always tried to create something better than what a person already has. But again, that's not always possible. Sometimes there's security issues with a person has a machine or whatever, it's not being patched, but it's great for them, it's perfect. They've set it up and they've been doing their research on it for a long time and they know it just works exactly as it is. I think when you've got people in that situation, you just have to be really, again, go for a coffee and sort of sit down and talk to people and understand what is it about the setup here that you have that is helping you, and try to show, well, actually, we're happy to get this set up in tandem and work with you or your PhD students and almost sort of kind of show them, actually, this is not too bad. In fact, it might be better. Your code is running significantly faster. We're just starting to move a chunk of people from one of the last remaining clusters on York to Viking 2. And, there was a little bit of nervousness from doing that. They've been working with this cluster for a long time, but actually it was a factor of 10 faster. And just without doing anything, just moving the workload, just because new technology, you can, there's more cores, things like that. So they were able to see, oh, actually, it's not terrible. It's actually better. We should continue to do that. So I always try and come in with a bit of evidence if I can. And there's always people who will resist change, and that's, I think we can all be like that at times. But there are often people who are keen and they want to work with the latest things, so work with them first, and then you can at least start to build some evidence, some case studies, some things like that, which you can show to other people and say, actually, this is what we have achieved, and this is, there's some evidence here, there's proof, and that seems to have worked so far.
Yeah, I think, just to respond to that, Emma, you made a really good point. I think and it returns back to what Simon Hood was saying earlier, is around, if there are people who are in the organisation, and we obviously probably on the research side in terms of influential academics or research kind of group leaders, if they can be advocates for the changes that we see are coming or that we feel that we need to make because we want to improve elements of our service, then if we can get them on board, and if that's with coffee or if it's with any other blandishments, then that's actually a really effective way to get things done and to kind of get the seed going for that.
Yeah, they can be our champions going forward as well. It's not just been me in a vacuum doing this. I've had to have support from the academics in the university to be part of the journey, and they are very much involved in the design of different things, the design of services. What do you need? It's I can guess, but I really need their input.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe just one final thing from me on this area is that, to me as well, having those kind of having the tendrils in the right research areas and the right research groups with the right people, then there will be things that are a sphere of influence we don't necessarily know about coming in terms of change, and it could be organisational change or institutional level. But if we get a bit of a heads up on those kind of things, then we can respond to stuff in a way that is, I think, it makes our lives that bit easier.
I think making sure that you're essentially designing for change as well, and that you're protecting the users from future changes as well is really important.
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely a key DRI professional skill, because that's a lot of your work is around kind of sitting between researchers and all the kind of mess that we create underneath that. But
Yeah, there was part of this topic was around security, and I don't know whether Simon Hood's going to jump in for me on this. If I set the stage that we obviously, people do know that at Manchester we had a really significant cyber incident last year, and we're still kind of building back and responding to that and thinking about the way that's going to affect our research community in terms of the way they have to work. Simon, I don't know whether you wanted to say any words on this.
Yeah, I was going to save that for the last question, but it overlaps. Yeah, so last June, I think it was, the threat actors, as the cybersecurity people like to call them, the bad guys, compromised our Active Directory, and as you can imagine, that had enormous consequences. What I can say, on a positive note, is there was absolutely no evidence that any of the research IT platforms were hacked. So I sit here looking slightly smug, but still, the consequences have been absolutely enormous. A lot of the researchers keep saying, oh, you know, this is going to go away soon, isn't it? No. The world has changed at Manchester, and it's never going to go back to the way it was. The cybersecurity team is going to be about 20 people, I think, soon. Before the cybersecurity incident, it was 3. The amount of work necessary to develop and build new platforms, I would guess, has doubled overnight with the amount of hurdles we have to get through now, through sort of security governance, information governance, technical design governance, and other things I've no doubt forgotten. You can understand the university's point of view, because at one point it looked as though we were going to have our entire network connection to just cut off completely. And if we'd been really unlucky, we'd have been the subject of a ransomware attack. Staggeringly, we were not. So we're actually really, really lucky. So I guess the message is, if you haven't been compromised, lucky you, for goodness sake, do something about it now. Otherwise, it could be unthinkable. If your major business platforms get ransomwared, you're absolutely post 930 industrial language.
Yeah, and we saw this with the British Library recently. And
Exactly.
With, and with other incidents of this kind across the area that we work in. I mean, the other thing I think about the cyber incident from our perspective is that we've got a lot of work to do. We're still doing that work. We're going to have to make these big changes that you talked about, Simon. But actually landing that with the research community and changing the way that people work is going to be that's going to be a real challenge.
It is. It's an enormous challenge. A lot of the researchers still find it difficult to accept that the magnitude of the change that has occurred and that the world is never going to go back to the way it was. Now, I'm not saying that some of the changes that have been put in place are correct. My colleagues will know I firmly disagree with some of them, but nevertheless, the world's never going to go back to the way it was, and we have to work with the cybersecurity people to find compromises between university functioning as a university and not getting ransomwared. It's really hard.
Cheerful stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So the final topic for kind of conversation with the panel, but then I'd like some questions as well if people have them. And it does lean very heavily into that. We're talking about the sort of things that are on the risk register for a service and for a components and capability, and also the mitigation that we have for those. So I don't know whether we've obviously Manchester's had a bit of a chat over the last few minutes. I don't know whether anyone wants to talk about the approach to risks and mitigation that you take with your service.
So one risk in software world is, somebody alluded to it before, that a key package stops being maintained, and which is, can be incredibly painful when you can see the pull requests with fixes just piling up and not getting merged. But luckily, there is something we can do, which is fork it and merge all those patches and then take on the responsibility of maintaining it ourselves, which you don't want to do very often, but sometimes there are key packages that you're like, actually, that's fundamental. We can't carry on without that thing being maintained, and that's something that we need to take on. You don't want to do that for everything. Sometimes you should look for a similar package that does the same thing, but then you have to spend all that effort importing, changing functionality over, etc. So it's something that that's still a risk in there. I think that's the biggest risk in the software world.
Okay. And is there any other comments from the panel on the question of risk mitigation side?
Well, risk and mitigation are very important, but they need to be proportionate. And I think that research computing is a risky domain, and we enjoy having the risk. It gives us, we need to have flexibility. We need to experiment with stuff and do speculative things. So it's very difficult sometimes if you're part of a risk system within an institution to convince the people that manage that your risk profile and your approach has to be necessarily different. And that's a job that I think is very hard to do, and I don't have any answers for that.
Okay, so, well, thanks very much to the panel for the kind of great input and comments so far. I wonder if there are any questions online that we've received, or if there's any questions from the room. Yeah, hi. Oh, have we got a mic? Yeah.
I can shout back if anybody can see.
I can't hear that on the internet,
Yes.
Chris.
Christopher Woods. So given the agility of mission-focused organisations like Figshare, cybersecurity, the breadth of a CIO's mission, which means sometimes they don't even know what research IT is, is it a help or a hindrance that digital research infrastructure is viewed as and managed as a subset of IT?
Okay. I know which side I'm voting. It's a hindrance.
I've only ever experienced being in IT services, and it's actually been a help so far. But if it stops being that, then I'm willing to be flexible. But I think the big thing for me is, I think it was Heidi Fraser-Krauss was the person who sort of wanted research IT, and she was director of IT at the time at the university. So we've had a number of people in senior positions in IT who were very supportive of research IT, and they wanted to make it happen and things like that. I think if you're in a situation where you don't have that, then I can understand why you'd want to get out of there. So I've been lucky so far. Hopefully it'll stay that way, but I can see why it can go either way. The career route is a different thing, though. That is becoming a hindrance.
Yeah, question at the back.
Hi, question from Pfizer Samreen online. What key challenges have started to emerge with the evolving landscape of DRI, and what advice would you offer to the community beginning to develop digital research infrastructure?
Great question. I wonder who'd like to respond to that. Key challenges, Simon.
Well, key challenges now. Advice, I would say.
Advice, yeah.
Talk to your peers. I mean, NA is a great organisation. If you can get out, again, I'm always a fan of face-to-face.
Yeah.
If you're, I don't know, just for example, you're a newer university, can I put it that way, who doesn't have a load of HPC kit, for example, now, and you're thinking of building some, go and talk to your nearest, York, Sheffield, Liverpool, Manchester. Go and talk to people who've done it before, and then they can tell you all the things that went wrong and all the things that are going to go wrong, and then you can avoid them. That's a key piece of advice. People are friendly, I mean, I was talking to someone from one of the minor universities at Liverpool online a week ago. She was asking for loads of advice on research data storage, management, archive, and so on. I gave her everything I could think of, and she was really happy at the end of it. We're all friendly people. Go ask.
I think as well, consider, we've had sort of, not full-on secondments, but people potentially working in my team a day a week, a couple of days a week, because they're just interested in what we do. And there are flexible ways in which you can just try it out and get some experience. And, that's also sort of students as well. We've got summer placements. I have a placement student every year. Apprenticeships. There's a lot of different ways in now, and a lot of different ways to try and sort of experience it. And again, talking to people. We are friendly most of the time.
I think it's really important to not fall into that trap of isolation and making sure that you are exposing yourself to other people's mistakes and learnings and things like that, either through events like this or just kind of making sure that your team is allowing that as well, I think.
I think another challenge is the getting the people to engage, and the people that aren't already engaged with DRI are often the people that need to engage the most, need the help most, and I think the kind of weight around that is things that have already been discussed, like getting out there, talking to them, and getting their peers to talk to them. also I found really useful. Like if you working with somebody and they're really happy with you know, what that work has been, getting them to they can have a more respected voice perhaps sometimes, if it's coming from like a senior professor to another senior professor versus somebody lower down the totem.
Yeah. Yeah, Sam.
I think probably the biggest challenge is people. It's not the people in themselves, it's that there aren't enough of them. A lot of us are spread very thin, and we know we could do things better, but there aren't enough of us. So getting more people into the field is a major thing we need to do.
Maybe just a reflection from me in relation to this topic that we talked about it already, but that concept of the network, so not just the NA, but I think about people like the Research Data Alliance, who I work with quite closely this, but also across the UK particularly, with our colleagues who are maybe at the smaller institutions, where they are stretched very thin, making ourselves, as you said, make ourselves available to help with questions they may have, to talk about our experience with the platforms or with the services that we provide, you know, to do things like case studies, to make you know, to make the outputs of what we do, you know, not just in terms of the work, but the systems and the infrastructure, the DRI that sits behind it, available in a way that people can use and they can help to make their decisions from, is really part of this kind of community, isn't it? And you know, the cliche is the collegiate approach, but I do think we do that. We do, you know, we do really lean into, you know, supporting each other as colleagues in these kind of networks, and that's you know, one of the real things that helps us to move forward, you know, as a group. Right, so I'm conscious of time. Are there any more questions in the room or online? Okay, so, oh yeah, just...
Can I give a really hard question?
to wrap things up, yes.
Okay, Christopher Woods again. My biggest worry, actually, in terms of cybersecurity and the world we're moving to, is when eventually a Python or an R package is essentially hacked because the maintainer doesn't maintain it anymore, it's taken over by someone else who backdoors it, and a university is compromised through that route. Because the moment we go down that path, we then really are talking about having to basically allow list the whole of research software, which is an impossible task. And I already know groups effectively trying to do getting university to sign up to paid Anaconda for security scanning, and you can only use those particular packages. What is the panel's view in how we're going to solve this problem and still allow researchers to actually write software?
My view is I'm terrified.
Yeah.
What will we do? Like if some key package, if SciPy gets compromised, we're done, right? That's game over.
So even without it being a Python kind of thing, we've had issues from the teaching front where we've had courses that write C and C++, and CrowdStrike flags debug executables as being malicious. So no one can do any debugging on the managed desktops, which has been a bit of a problem. There's been workarounds put in place to allow that, so it's been fine, but that's kind of become more of a problem over time.
I've had that problem on Macs as well, like trying to teach Fortran or C or something, and the not being able to debug it because the executable hasn't been signed. Like,
Yeah, I don't think that's the way to solve it, because it's a kind of after the stable door kind of approach. I think perhaps we should think about our systems and making them inherently more secure. You know, from the bottom up, get used to working in a more secure environment, not a more controlled one, but one where security is built in as part of the way it works. I mean, Linux has secure versions with lots of features, like if you use top, you can see other people's processes. Should you really be able to see that? You can change that in SE Linux, so you can't see other people's processes, and that means you can't discover a lot of information about your fellow users. Maybe that would be a good thing to implement on our systems, and there's other things like that to think about.
Thank you very much. Well, that's, I think, a perfect point on which to wrap things up. If we could just show some appreciation for the panel this morning.